You're listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series.
Welcome to the studio, welcome to the microphone, Supreme Court Judge David Ashton Lewis.
Welcome to you, Cole. Welcome to our listeners, and thank you for having me.
Well, it's been a very big week, a historical week.
Yes.
And the 11th of the 11th passed us by on Tuesday of this week.
Yes.
I thought it was the perfect opportunity for us to revisit that conversation. We do it quite often each year. And quite often each year. We do it every year.
We do. And we
but
do
the bigger issue is at times we get some commentary that says, look, enough about war, enough about the World War I, World War II and all of the great conflicts. I think it's the perfect opportunity for reflection.
Yeah, I'm sad that you used the magic word, because the 11th hour of the 11th month, 1918, is not just something to remember, but it's something that, when it comes, should cause reflection.
Yes.
And it's people who don't reflect, I think, who would say, oh, we get too much of it. Well, I can tell you, 60,000 Australian corpses in graves in northern France and in the Pacific. I think they would require or request that we remember what they did and we reflect on it. And it's the failure to reflect that leads to the problem that sprung up 21 years later in 1939.
And I think that's a good point to make, and we'll come back to what sprung up again and again, and we often see breadcrumbs of it again around the world starting to move in a direction. But I think the bigger issue is it's taking a moment out of our busy lives, taking a moment out of our stresses and our worries and concerns to realise that without these two great conflicts that have happened in the past, it has shaped who and what we are today.
Oh, most
and
definitely.
it has shaped the world as you see it today.
Yes.
Now, some may argue that, it's a terrible place, we can't afford houses and so forth. Well, you know what, if we actually have a look at Nazi Germany and the way things were rolling out, if they had kept going, we may very well have had a very, very different reality if that had taken place.
Well, the trouble with dictators is they basically provide, but they also control.
Sure.
You have no freedom of speech or thought or whatever. Now, one of the difficulties with democracy is it appears sloppy. And it's because why? Because it's the people.
It appears chaotic, too.
It does appear chaotic, but yet it grants certain freedoms that we just take for granted and we expect. Now, those freedoms are rooted in the graves in northern France.
Yes, they
the
are.
Graves in the war cemeteries around the world.
So
those expectations are rooted in that.
Let's have a look at the statistics, because we have two wars that finished on that day, or the armistice of World War I, as well as, and then it was turned into the Deck of the Missouri. The Japanese signed their surrender on the 11th of the 11th. So, what was the population of Australia around World War I?
Around World War I, we were about 3.4 million people.
3.4. I understand we're around about 25, 26 million people.
27 million now.
Today.
And we were, when the war broke out, we were about 7 million when the war broke out. When I was born in 1950...
Yes.
I remember...
You're talking about World War II.
I'm talking about World War II. We'd grown to about 9 million people. So outbreak of World War I, about 3.2 million. Outbreak of World War II, 7 million.
There you go. So 60,000 people lost in the Great War, World War I.
In the Great War, yes.
And 3 million people?
Yeah, 30. Yep. Then 39,000 in the Second World War.
Yeah, so I remember, and as you rightly mentioned, you go out to some of our rural towns, you will find Anzac monuments and lists of names of people who didn't return. And one of the ones, and it's not far away from here, Coogin, on top of Coogin Hill there is a line of are pine trees, and on each of those pine trees is a family name.
Yes.
These are people who lost someone in World War One, and they planted a tree and put their name on it.
Oh, good.
So every community was touched by the
without
Great
a
War.
doubt.
Knew someone that had
Farming
passed it
community,
away.
Yeah. Not only the big cities, which were not that big really, but Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Hobart, Adelaide, Perth. But you've then got to head a couple of 100 miles inland from all those, and you'll still find these monuments in towns today that are virtually dying.
Yes.
The best example, I had 4 uncles, 2 uncles and 2 great uncles who fought in the First World War. 2 of the great uncles, they both went to Gallipoli, older brother and a younger brother. And they were light horsemen, but they were dismounted. The younger brother was killed on July the 4th, 1915, and he lies today in a place called Shrapnel Gully and on the Gallipoli Peninsula. His older brother came off, he survived, and they were all told beforehand, you'll be remounted when this Gallipoli campaign is over. Well, he was remounted, but he was told, but you're not staying in the Middle East, you're going to France. Now, there was no light horse really in France, but he was very good with teams of horses. So he ended up spending 1916, 17 and 18, or late 1916, 17 and 18, pulling big heavy field guns into position with a team of 6 horses. He controlled it, and they would unlimber the gun would fire. When the German counter-battery fire had located that gun, his job was to limber the thing up quickly and get that gun out of there so it wouldn't be destroyed. Now, he survived the war and he came home and he lived to the age of 76, and sadly, he was killed crossing the road.
Oh, dear.
He got hit by a car. And so, but he lived a good life. He was a lovely man. And the other 2 were uncles, and they were snipers. They went to France in 1916, didn't go to Gallipoli, went to France in 1916, and as reinforcements, that is, refilling battalions or companies that had men killed. And so, but they were both, again, with all of them, they were bush boys, so they were very good shots with rifle, and they were pretty adaptive. They could adapt to a situation. And I was very close to one of them, and he died when I was 21. And I said to him that he was 18 in 1917. And I said, why did you go? And he said, well, we all thought it was a big lark. And we were boys from the country, 100 miles from Melbourne. To get into Melbourne was near impossible. But to do this, we were going to see a bit of the world. And I said, did you? And he said, yes. I saw London, I saw Paris, I saw everything. And he said, but I also saw the other thing. I saw the killing and the maiming and the murdering. And as a sniper, I took a role in that. So his attitude, like most men or women who have served, we've come back with really good memories, but their reflection, which I encourage everyone to do, was, for heaven's sake, don't go to war.
Yes.
Don't kill. Don't do anything. Now, he went back and farmed. In 1919, he marched in the Victory Parade down the mall with the Aussies with their slouch hats, and he then said, within a week, I was on a ship coming back to Australia, and he said, arriving in Australia, I farmed from 1919 again up until, well, he died, up until 1971.
Yeah, wow. Look, the individual stories of heroism, the individual stories of their lives are quite inspiring unto themselves. But if we stand back from those 2 major conflicts, David, and especially when we look at the build-up and then the actual war, and then what transpired afterwards. There's lessons to be learnt.
Oh, good heavens, there are. And the lessons can be learned if you know someone or if you've read about someone's experience. Now, I said he farmed up until he died in 1971. But in 1960, he was gassed. He was out sniping and he got gassed, mustard gas. And he was blind for 3 months, and he had really only a quarter of his lung capacity. But like most of those old bushies, he rolled his own and he smoked, and you could hear him coughing when he was coming across the paddock. You could hear Uncle Bill coughing. But he always had a roll-your-own durry hanging out of the corner of his mouth. And he tried for a number of years, and I can remember it was 1962 that the celebration were because he got onto, as a war veteran, TPI, that is totally and permanently incapacitated.
Sure.
Yet he still kept working for the next 8 years, going out farming, fencing. But he got that pension because of, they said, the injuries he'd suffered because he was gassed and shot twice in the back by a German soldier. And but he said, you know, that pension was great. We could, your aunt and I could live on that, but I would supplement because I couldn't stop working. I'd been born and in 1898 working on the land as a labourer. They didn't own a property, but how he came into my family, he met my father's older sister at some function, and they obviously hit it off. And with his totally and permanently incapacitated and the work that he did during the 20s, 30s, 40s, he made enough money to buy a 300-acre, 400-acre fattening lambs up property.
Nice.
And he loved doing that. So when I see what gave me a great reflection, so there he was, an 18-year-old boy getting on a boat. This is going to be a great lark. And he said his first battle was at a place in France called Polygon Wood in, I think, early 1917. And he said, that was where I saw my first dead man, David. And I said, what? And he said, well, I was going out to find a place in a forest to snipe in. He said, I walked around a little trail, and lo and behold, about 20, 30 feet in front of me was a German soldier looking along the sights of his rifle, looking straight at me. And he said, I froze. I thought, get ready, I'm going to feel the bullet hit me before I hear it. But it didn't happen. And he said, as I got closer, I saw that man had been shot right through the forehead. And he had this neat bullet hole, and he'd just fallen on his rifle. And he looked like he was taking aim. And he said, that was my first introduction to the horrors of the trench warfare, the mud, the gas, the heavy artillery shelling, seeing men shaking who were frightened, seeing other men who, come on, I couldn't care less. And he said, I saw the whole range of human nature. And he said, I then ended up killing men.
And there we go.
And there we go. You reflect on it.
You do. And that is the point of these sort of marking of days. One of the bigger ones that I've noted in other conversations is, again, we talk about this all the time. History is something that we should be aware of, we should study. Yeah. And again, we should draw parallels or look at the breadcrumbs with what's going on around the world today. Definitely. And realise that, hang on a minute, history at times can repeat itself, and it has done in the past.
It does all the time.
And it does all the time. So again, when we see things going on around the world and we see what the build-up was like in the beginning of World War II, the lead up to World War I, which was very strange.
But similar, it was the great powers jockeying for position. Mastery on the oceans, and mastery on the continent.
And nowadays we see a very similar parallel with the great countries jockeying for position. We see it between China and Russia and America and the EU. Again, it may be in a different format, We're not doing it on the oceans anymore, but
Well, Pacific Ocean,
Sure.
that Indo-Pacific region is mainly, as it was in
Still
the second,
contentious.
is going to be mainly a naval power.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I'm reading 2 books on the Battle of Midway. Now, the Battle of Midway took place in June of 1942, like 6 months after Pearl Harbor. And in less than an hour, the Japanese had a fleet with 4 major fleet carriers, and they were just sailing through the Pacific, taking islands, because each of these carriers had over 130 aircraft on them. And the Americans found them, and so out from 2 American, because the Americans only had really 3 big fleet carriers, and one was being fixed up in San Diego. So they had 2, the Enterprise and the Yorktown. And they took off from there, and in the space of about 15 minutes in that hour, the tide of war turned, and the elite of Japan was destroyed, because their 4 aircraft carriers obviously gave them the ability to it, because they had Marines and they had battleships and cruisers with them. But if those aircraft carriers were sunk, then that whole fleet ability was gone. And
That's right.
in 15 minutes, 3 of those 4 aircraft carriers, now, whether you like Americans or not, and they can get on your wick a bit, but these dive bomber pilots who flew from the Yorktown and the Enterprise in 15 minutes sank 3 of those aircraft. They lost 3 of those aircraft carriers. They lost many men, and I'm reading the story of one man who survived.
Nice.
And it's a human story. You meet the man and you realise what he did. And he said the Japanese aircraft carriers had a big red circle on their flight deck. And he put his Dauntless dive bomber down into near vertical dive down, aimed for that red. It was already had been hit and was on fire. Aimed for that red circle, hit it, and it blew up the magazine much of that forward part of the flight deck. Within an hour or 2, that aircraft carrier had rolled over and sunk.
Yes,
and
indeed.
So these are the strange things that we should reflect on war. Why do we need to go? Because he, at the end of his book, said, I reflect on the pointless and purposeless killing of people, both Japanese and ourselves, because he flew right from 1942 to 1945, and he said, I've just come to born in 1916, died in 2016, made it to 100, and he said, over my 100 years, I've never been able to come to peace with why men fight.
Oh dear, it's yes. Well, we can look at our own humanity in that, and that happens in our younger years, and it happens at a country or a regime level, from want of a better term, but it is still basically the same thing. Punching.
So it's remembrance, and I would encourage people, whether you get bored with it or whatever, reflect on it. Reflect on the stories look, anyone my age and older and even a bit younger grew up hearing about the Second World War, because most of them, their fathers had fought.
Yes.
I've mentioned before on this show, I'd go to sales, sheep sales, cattle sales, and see my father introduced to other men, and before probably 10 minutes, the conversation after, what do you do, or where's your property, the conversation was, did you fight?
Yes, that's right. And where were you?
99% said, yeah, unfortunately I did. So I grew up, and most of my generation listening would have grown up hearing about it. Now, aren't we blessed, because the only war that really affected my generation, and I'm 75, was Vietnam.
Sure.
And Vietnam was detested, and it wasn't a real war in the sense that whole populations call it, and it was draft. It wasn't freely volunteered,
Yes.
although many men did volunteer
Yes.
and went into the army because they wanted the joy of what Bill Bennett wanted. Oh, it's a joy. I want to see the world.
I've heard this a number of times. The only lottery I ever won.
Yeah, was
terrible.
the draft.
It was the draft.
Well, I was fortunate. My number didn't come out because I would have gone into the intake in January 1970. So I would have gone to Vietnam. I would have spent a year in Vietnam, and then it really was winding down then. And the other thing that is being brought up a lot is Gough Whitlam and the dismissal, because it's 50 years ago on Armistice Day. And I can see, though, the sadness of it. If you're a Labor voter, it was a coup. I even heard Anthony Albanese saying it wasn't a constitutional crisis. It was an engineered removal of a Prime Minister. And I'm sorry, Prime Minister, it was a constitutional crisis. John Kerr had the power to do what he did, and two brazen egos caused it. One was called Malcolm Fraser, and the other was called Gough Whitlam. Fraser, in my opinion, did the wrong thing by he didn't reject supply, he just kept adjourning it. Now the rules, and I think they're back, is no matter what the opposition think in the Senate and in the two houses, well, in the Senate mainly, what the opposition think of the current government, it's an agreed thing, you always pass the budget.
Yes.
And, of course, Fraser, and he had this really, he was called the knuckle biter or the ankle man. He was a brilliant senator, and he led the Senate. And they did the wrong thing, in my view. Whitlam should have been given supply, allowed to govern, because although supply was denied, and they went to an election, everyone I knew was, and it was my first year in the law, everyone said, Labor Party's going to romp it in. But
Yes.
I knew factory working men who said, we've got no hope. And I said, why do you say that? And they said, because Whitlam mucked it up.
Yeah, okay.
Well, how right it was, because Fraser got in December, I think, 75, in a screaming majority. So that's one of the vagaries of politics, but it's also one of the things to remember and to reflect on Armistice Day.
Give us and probably a good point, because we have a number of generations, including my son's generation. Why do we reflect? Well, it is to remember and honour those who've come before us, I think,
Yes.
is probably a good starting point. But also to learn the lessons or understand the
Yes.
lessons of the past. And I was going to throw to you to round off, David.
Well, let me just round off with this. We've still got about 4 minutes. I was going to round off with this. How many times do we come to a position in thinking, in politics, in whatever, pretty sure that we've got it under control, we know it, and yet you get involved in a conversation with others, some you agree with, some you don't, and you go away or you're thinking at the time, I didn't know that.
Yes,
I wasn't aware of that.
that's right.
So that's one of the reasons why history is good, reflecting is good, because even if you think you've got it in a nutshell, you may find out you haven't.
That's right.
Or you may find out there's something there that encourages you to have your thought on this. And if you're honest, you'll think, well, I did pass through it, but now that I've heard other reflections,
Yes.
I think I probably do need. So the concept of reflection is as important as the concept of remembering.
And look, it's funny, as you age and as you grow in maturity and understanding, as well as just talking with other people, how your opinions or your views can take a different look.
Yeah, yes.
And I think that's very important for us to continue to not just sit there and say, I've got that one in a nutshell, I don't need to know anymore. It's always good to listen and hear.
Well, you can reverse it with that 16-year-old who says, look, when I was 16, my mother and father knew nothing.
Yes.
When I got to 21 or 22, I was amazed how much they had learnt. And so that's part of life. So November the 11th is a good time to turn our mind to 60,000 white crosses in French battlefields, and to think about each one, under each one of those crosses was a baby who was born, who was a son, who was a husband, who was a human being. And they lie there now as a skeleton.
And I think the point being is that if we examine the lead up to it, examine the decisions that took us to war, examine the effect of war, and a great example is those 60,000 crosses, and then examine the aftermath of war.
Yes.
There's some great lessons to be learnt there. There's some great things to keep an eye out and keep an eye on. We're getting AUKUS-class submarines for a reason, and it wouldn't be because we don't need them. We actually do need them because there is a threat.
But there are many who think we don't need them. All you can say to them is, I don't share your view.
Happy Remembrance Day.
Yeah, happy Remembrance Day. And as always, thank you for having me.
Thank you, David Ashton Lewis.
You've been listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series. Support local online content and become a financial supporter today at 4crb.com.